Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live stream on infrared photography. I'm so glad you could join us. So thank you to those of you who have joined us live today. Let's see here. We have Chris, who's joined us. Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining. Jay has joined us from the Bahamas, sunny Bahamas. I kind of wish I was in the sunny Bahamas right now. Here I'm in the Midwest, and it can be beautiful in the fall, but sometimes that we go from summer to the back end of fall very quickly, and we don't get to enjoy the good part of fall as much. So welcome to Michael. Thanks for joining us. Taking from Connecticut, probably beautiful this time of year. Shooting with your Canon 50D converted to IR. Excellent. And Andrea, thank you for joining us from Italy. Very nice. Excellent. And Phil is joining us from California. Nice to see you, Phil. And Chris says it's definitely not as sunny right now. And Susan is joining us from the UK, where it's very warm today. Excellent. Thank you all for joining us today. So as usual, we have a number of infrared images to look at. We have some that people have sent in to show off. We have some that people have sent in to edit. And we've got infrared questions and a lot of great things happening today. So I'm so excited to dive into all of it. Let me do a little bit of housekeeping here and talk about a few things quickly before we dive in. We'll look at my my main slide here. So a quick comment, if you want to learn more about infrared, today is the last day of the end of summer sale for my infrared book, Color Doesn't Exist. So if you go to infraredbook.com, you've got 2 discount codes. The first discount code you could use is for the print edition, and that is for 20% off, and that code is summer20, summer20, for 20% off the print edition. Today's the last day for that. And then the other code that you could use today only is the code is free ship. That's free ship, FREESHIP, and that is for free shipping on the print and ebook bundle, which is a particularly good deal for those who are international, because that's free shipping on the international shipping, which is pretty expensive. So today's the last day for that sale. So again, the first one is summer 20, and then the second one is free ship. If you'd like to learn more information about these live streams or submit content, you can go to 590.red to submit information. And if you'd like any information at all about infrared, including downloads and a whole variety of things, learn about lenses, there's a ton of information available on my blog at 590.red/blog. So go there for all of that information. Okay, so let's cut back here. And let's see here. We have someone joining us from St. Petersburg. Wow. So that is very far away. Boy, I'm going to, the name, forgive me for butchering the names if they're not familiar to me. Forvinyek. So thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate it. And then we have Anshul is here. Got some images coming up of his we'll take a look at later. And then we have Rosalind joining us from Germany. Wow, we've got quite a international group today. It's nice to be able to do this on a weekend where the time zone is more accommodating for more people. So thank you everyone for joining us. Okay, so let's dive in and start looking at some of the content that we have here today. So the first bit that I have is from Charles. So let me pull up the images from Charles. We'll take a look here. Charles sent us, let's see, let me get this on screen so we can take a look at it while I'm talking about it. And let's see here. This is a deep infrared image. So let's see here. We'll do this. And there we go. All right. So Charles says, let me pull up Charles' information here. There's two files. One is a RAW file, and the other is a JPEG. This is the JPEG that we're looking at now with this processing. I must say the photo was taken with a Samsung NX2000 converted to full spectrum and an 850 nanometer filter. So that 850 nanometer filter is going to block out infrared, block out all visible light and only capture infrared light of 850 nanometers and higher. So taking a look at this image, you could see some of the telltale characteristics of a deep infrared image taken with an 850 nanometer filter, particularly this black sky. Like, wow, just completely blanked out of here, which I'm a big fan of. I love the drama of a dark sky like that, especially contrasted with this bright foreground. So you've got some trees here, you've got a path off to the side here, and then you've got some granite. Let me find my cursor. Let's see, my little cursor tool that highlights where my mouse is. There we go. So you can see my mouse a little bit better. Okay, so let's take a quick look at this image, and I'm not going to do a full edit on the raw version of this because I actually think Charles did a pretty good job on this image. So my comments are pretty minor, but let's take a look at the raw image to see what he had to do to get to this point. So let's see here. Let me switch back and find the raw version of this. Okay, here we go. And I'll pull up the develop module and switch back. Oops. All right. Okay. So let's take a look here and see what he had to work with. So you can see, this is what you would normally see with a deep infrared image. They tend to be sort of on the purple magenta is the way the sensors capture them, but they're definitely monochrome. You could switch this to a black and white profile, and you can either use Adobe Monochrome, or you could pick from a variety of the black and white profiles, camera matching, whatever you'd like to use. You have a lot of flexibility with profiles when you do a deep infrared image. You don't have to worry about special profiles or color temperature or anything like that. So you could pick a profile, like for example, if I pick this profile that gives me a little bit of that deep sky, that kind of gets me on the way. So we can see here there's a bit of a dust spot here, so I'll take care of that so that doesn't annoy me. And because I end up with dust spots all the time, so this is not a knock against you, Charles. This happens to the best of us. So we'll get rid of that little thing, make that go away. Now, a couple things to note about this image. So one of the things is that in Charles' version, we didn't have. Let's talk about some of the differences here. Let's see if I can pull up a comparison of the two of them. And you can see that Charles' edited version is on the right. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Charles' edited version is on the right, and this is the version that I've just started editing on the left. So you can see that the highlights are a little bit hot, so there's clearly something that he had to do there to bring those down. And also the granite here is a little bit darker in his version. And then the road, so there's the road that was eliminated. And so let's talk about the things that would have been done, that he might have done to achieve that. And this could have been done in Lightroom or Photoshop. There's a variety of ways. So let's talk about the road first. Now, in addition to dealing with spots, you can use the content aware remove to remove bigger things in the image. So if I make my circle a little bit bigger, it's about the size of my yellow and purple. The purple circle means that I'm holding my mouse button down. And then do a content aware a fill there, you could see that does, a pretty good job of hiding the road. And if I click on it, I could use that, or I could use any of these other tools to do that. So that's kind of the first thing. If I go back to the basic panel, then I could start to address some of the other things in the image, like I could bring down the highlights to bring down some of the really really kind of blooming highlights in the trees. You could increase the contrast of the image. And then the one thing that I think there's probably more, I would say there was probably more masking or maybe some other work that was done in different areas to create more contrast in specific areas of the image. One of the areas that I would do, and I think there was a little bit of this done in Charles' version, is to really bring out some contrast in the granite. So for example, if you were to take a brush tool and go over to the granite here and paint this, and then from here you could increase contrast, you could create a use the curve to create more contrast, and you could go into texture and clarity to kick that up as well, to kind of suit to taste depending on how much of an attention grab you want that to be. So really, I think that the edit that Charles did was quite good. Let's go back to his edit and take a peek there. I think that was one over here. Let me switch back. Okay, yep. Here is the version that Charles did, and I think this looks great. So you've got the deep skies. You've eliminated the road distraction. You've got a lot of nice contrast in the image, and you've got a little bit of punch, a little bit of crispness here down in the granite. So I really like this. I really like this image, and I like the edit that you did on this, Charles. So very nice. Thank you for sharing this with us. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's see here. Who has joined us? We have Benji has joined us from Montana. Hello, welcome. Let's see. Oh, and then Foven NYC. Oh, I see. I got it. Fovian NYC uses a Sigma Foven for my experiments. That is I think that is one of, those are some interesting cameras to work with, and then they can be challenging as well. Chris says, currently processing some IR images from last week's vacation. And then Chris says, is there any group where we could post these or make one on Flickr, for example? That's an interesting idea. So I've been thinking about various ways that we might share the images that we talk about here. And I'm certainly open to suggestions. One of the things that I'm currently thinking about doing is doing a bit of a showcase in future live streams. So maybe picking a topic, maybe a particular filter or style of infrared, and then sharing some of those and showcasing all of those on the live stream, and just focus on all of the great images that you all produce. So that's one idea that I'm percolating on, but I'm open to other ideas as well to sort of share the images that you all are creating. So thank you very much for that idea. I'll continue to work on that. Let's see here. So next up, we have an image from almazochrom. So let's find this image, and let me I'll get the image teed up while I am talking about it. I'm going to pull up the raw version of this image, and we can look at the raw version of this image while I'm talking about it. This is an interesting one. This is really fascinating. So there's a little twist here involved in this one. So let's take a look at the image, and we'll bring this up, and I'll read what almazochrom has to say. First of all, thank you for all of your support to the IR community. I submitted a photo of a tree I took in 2022, and you showcased it in one of the live streams. I traveled back and photographed the same tree almost a year later, and this is that raw image from a year later, and my edit and are uploaded. Let's see, and my edit are uploaded my first time to go a little wild with an edit, and that he does. So let's talk about this image. So before we dive into his version, let's talk about sort of the conventional, and because I want to demonstrate with this image what conventional looks like versus maybe unconventional, taking things a little bit different way. But in order to do that, let's talk about the conventional side of things first. So to do that, let's do a very quick edit on this image so that we can see what that sort of looks like from a conventional perspective. So for example, if I was to start to edit this image, the first thing that I would want to do is set a profile. So let me set the profile to infrared temp -100 so I can get a white balance. We've got lots of potential subjects here, the ground, this granite in the background. So we could try some different things to see what works well. Those are pretty close. Let me go with the granite in the background. Then we could color swap the image, and that would go, let me go into the color swap profiles and pull these up, and you could see what different looks would be for this. I like this red look. This is a color swap where we take the channel mixer and swap red and blue, but then take the green channel and shift it over to red. And that's what creates this really cool red teal look. So let's go with that. So the other things you might do if you continue this edit, well, you know, maybe I would go into the crop tool and align my horizon, you know, so get the horizon level. That's something that I could do. And so I've got that done. And then from here, I could go in and I could make a bunch of adjustments. Let me do like a quick auto. That's, you know, big punch of color there. I could go into use a mask on the mountain range. Let's do a mask and do an object. The object mask is so nice. I can just go in and I can highlight something. I don't need to be perfect. And then I could say to Lightroom, yo, what do you think I'm trying to select here? And look at that. It does a pretty good job of selecting things. And then I can go down to dehaze and I could kick up the dehaze to add a little more, just a hair more punch there and maybe a little more contrast. So I can do a variety of things. So you can kind of see, if you've watched any of my videos, you've seen me go down this path many times. So let's call it there. And, you know, I could do other masking on the tree trunks, the ground, all kinds of stuff. So that's the general, you know, kind of direction you could take. Now let's look at the edit that he did. All right. So let me switch back here while I pull this up, and we will look at the edited version that almazochrom did. All right. Here we go. You may notice a little bit of a difference. So, I mean, first of all, let's just pause and take this in, because this is, you know, just a lovely, beautiful image, fantastic colors, very, very minimalist approach. Share your thoughts about what you think about this image. You're just in time. You're just in time. We're going over your image. So, this to me is just a kind of a stunning piece of minimalism with absolutely lovely colors in the tree, lovely colors in the sky, and the motion blur on the ground is fantastic. The other thing that I think is important to identify here is that the horizon isn't level, and I love the fact that the horizon isn't level. It adds to this sort of tension and motion that's happening in the image. So, you know, this just gives you an idea of some of the possibilities. Now, you're not going to be able to do all of this in Lightroom. You know, you're probably going to have to go over to Photoshop to do some of this. And you may not do this on every image, but look at the possibilities that exist. I find this is an absolutely lovely image. There's just so much beauty here. Beauty in the colors and in the starkness, the minimalism. This is almost getting into sort of a kind of a fine art style. So excellent. Congratulations on this image. It's thank you for sharing it with us. I think it's inspirational for everybody else to see the kinds of things that we can do with infrared. We don't have to be limited to the basic edits. Sometimes we can take an image and go a little bit farther. Let's talk a little bit about what you did here to achieve this. And so in order to do that, I'm going to pull up a comparison between these two images so that those of us who are, you know, trying to imagine what we might do for something like this can actually see, you know, what's involved in something like this. So let me pull up both of these together. So first of all, you know, so I think we've got a fairly good idea of the colors, you know, the how we got into this color range. So clearly there was some color swapping and some manipulation of the colors. Not quite the, I mean, obviously the one that I did was oversaturated and a bit much, but muting the colors a little bit is very nice, and working on the colors. So that part I think is, I can understand that pretty straightforward. The other thing is, clearly there had to be some work done to separate out the tree trunk, because this is challenge in an image. And I see this all the time in my work. When you're working with trees, you don't want the color, that vibrant color from the tree working its way into the trunk. And so clearly we've got that distinct separation. That color's been removed or manipulated somehow, so that we're getting the contrast between a neutral tree trunk and the colorful leaves in the tree. So that's very nice. You've got the work that was done in the sky, very nice. And, you know, interestingly, the whole, the background, the mountain range is just, you know, gone, which is fine. I mean, it's pretty minimal in this image, so I can totally see why. And then, of course, you know, blurring the foreground. And I can only imagine, probably, you know, if you look at this, he may have had to add some space on the right or below to fill out this image to get the right composition. It's not perfectly centered, it's just kind of off center. Of course, you've got that slope. Interestingly, I think the horizon level, I don't know if the level is exactly the way it was originally, if it was exaggerated, but I don't know. You know what's interesting is I find that the tree is mostly vertical and the horizon is sort of following. So, and then some of the cleanup work, like you could see that some of these branches, these lower branches on the left side, had to go away to create the sort of the starkness of the tree. But you could tell it's the same tree. You can see some of these other branches that are still there. So very nice work. Very nice work. Thank you for sharing with us. I think this is the kind of thing that really provides good inspiration for those of us to think about, you know, what's possible with our work. So thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. All right, let's see here. Let's see. I think this best describes it. Wow. Yep. Oh, and then he said, I tried to level the horizon to the tree shadow. Okay. Oh, and thank you so much. I mean, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate you all sharing what you've done. That's awesome, and a very interesting geometry. Yeah. So excellent work. Excellent work. Thanks so much. I'm glad you were all able to catch that and enjoy it. So let's see here. Let us move on to our next image, and this is from Anshul, so who is here with us today. So let me pull up the right image here. See what we're looking at. Okay, let me take a peek. I'm going to pull up your edited version so we can all take a look at it, and then we can talk about it. All right, so let's see here. Take a look at your edited image here, and then let me see what you had to say about it. So Anshul says, hey Rob, after watching your videos for a while, I made the switch from Affinity to Lightroom, and I'm happy I did that just for the masking abilities. Definitely, you know, if you go back maybe 3 years ago, it wasn't such an obvious choice, but the masking capabilities that have been added to Lightroom have been pretty amazing in the last couple of years. The image I've sent today is my first edit with Lightroom. It would be great if you could provide your general feedback on the edit and anything you would have done differently when it comes to masked edits. It was shot with a Hoya R72 filter using a full spectrum camera. Thank you and looking forward to the live stream. Okay, so let's talk about this. So my first impressions of the image are I love it. I'm a bit of a sucker for palm trees and infrared, and you've got some nice clouds and nice sky happening here. So I think you're off to a good start. You've shared with me the version of your image that has the masking. So let's look at your masking, and then let's talk about some of the choices that you made, and what's going on there. So I'm going to pull that up. I'm going to open that in the develop module in Lightroom. Get a drink while that's loading. All right. Okay, so let's take a look at the masks first. So, and this is your edited version with your masks that you have available. So first of all, well, let me go back. First of all, you've got the infrared temp -100, which totally makes sense to get a good white balance, and based on the clouds, you've got a very nice white balance. So that looks great. If we go into the masks, so let's talk about the masks. The first one, this mask number 1, this is clearly a color swap because there was no other profile that was used. So you're using a hue shift for the color swap. And if I look over here, I can see you've adjusted 156 degrees to get the colors that you like. That's one of the benefits of the hue, is being able to fine tune to exact degrees how much of a hue shift you want. So I think these colors look great. So I think that looks good. I love the orange color, and the sky color looks great. So that's good for me. If we go up to the next mask, we have a subject, and let me do the show overlay so we can see what's being selected here. And I'm going to take a look at some of the settings that you did. So you've increased the exposure a bit, which I think makes, about 1/3 of a stop. That makes a lot of sense to add a little bit of a pop to your subject, add some contrast, bring down the highlights, little adjustments to whites and blacks, maybe add a little bit of saturation. You've got a little bit of a curve going on here, and then a little bit of texture, clarity, and dehaze. And if I go down further, even some sharpness. So definitely all of those make sense. You're trying to add a little pop to the subject, and that works. You've got another mask here called foreground, but I don't think you have any settings in this one. You may not have ended up putting anything here, because you've got another one called the foreground without subject. So let me show overlay so you can see all of the elements here without the main subject. And in this case, you're drawing down the exposure a bit, about 1/3 of a stop. Again, helps create some separation between your subject and the rest of the image. Add some contrast and reduce texture and clarity. That's another tool you can use to downplay where you don't want the eye looking. And especially in an image like this, you've got, it's very easy for the same colored trees in the background to get cluttered with this foreground element. So doing the things that you did in the subject, using the subject to add additional exposure, clarity, texture, and then doing the background and the reverse of that, reducing the exposure, reducing clarity and texture, is going to help create some separation in a composition where, from a color perspective, it would otherwise blend. So I like what you've done there. And then the sky, let's take a look at the sky. We have, let's see here. So for the sky, looks like you've brought the exposure down a little bit, and you've got a little bit of contrast, adjusting highlights and shadows. So, and then a little bit of dehaze. So this all looks good. So I think your masks are pretty good. Let's talk about a couple things that I noticed outside of that. I think there is a very faint hotspot in this image. And let me show you what I mean. So it's hard to see here. Let me go back to your raw image, because you sent a raw image. And let me pull that up. And this may not be a big deal. in the case. This is not like an indictment of your edit, just kind of an observation for you to be aware of, and for others who may see this. So if you notice this kind of, and it may be hard to see here on the stream, but there's a little bit of a darkening that's happening here in the image, kind of right around the tree, and this kind of indicates to me that there might be a hot spot here in the center. And if I was to take from your raw image here, and if I kicked up the vibrance and the saturation all the way, now you can kind of see this discoloration in the clouds a little bit. So one of the things that you might do to address that is I would go and do a radial mask. And you know, there are times where I have like a very faint hotspot like this, and I'll just leave it alone because you don't really notice it in the final edit, and you may not notice it in your final edit as well. So, but then there are times when it's more noticeable, and you're going to want to take this action. So we'll walk through this. And so now that I have kind of a rough radial about roughly where I think this hotspot is, I'm going to make an adjustment. The two adjustments that you typically make to a hotspot are exposure and temperature. Those are the two things that tend to appear in a hotspot. And this one is very subtle, so I think it's just going to be a little bit of a temperature shift. So if I just take the temperature to right there, maybe like 8 or 9, you could see it removes a little bit of that color that exists in here. If I go the other way, you can kind of see, you know, where you start to see what's happening there in the sky. But if I just nudge this to about an 8 or a 9, that kind of gets rid of it. I may not even need an exposure adjustment. You know, maybe a very faint increase would do. Now, again, this is because I've got the saturation and luminance kicked up all the way. Once I've made this mask, if I go back and reduce the vibrance and saturation down to 0, you're not even going to notice. You'll need to walk away so your eyes can readjust to this level of saturation. But that is the way you would address that. So that is one observation that I had. The other observation that I had, let me go back to your, let me see if this is your edit. Yeah. So the other observation that I had is that I think that this image is a little bit underexposed. And so if you're new to Lightroom, that's understandable, because if you're basing your exposure on the monitor and the way your monitor is configured, so that would be, you know, that would be something to be aware of. Let's see. And Anshul says, I was surprised when I didn't see the hotspots, since this lens is supposed to have them. I thought I just got lucky in the yeah. So it could have been your settings. You know, it could have been a very faint version of your settings that allowed you to not see the hotspots there. Okay, so let's talk about exposure. One of the tools that you should be using in Lightroom to deal with exposure is the histogram up here on the upper right. And if I look up here, you'll notice that you can see in the background a gray, like a light gray bar that appears as I roll over different areas. So you can see this is the blacks, this is the shadows, this is the exposure, sort of the mid-tones, this is the highlights, and this is the whites. And you can see the highlights, there's very little up in this range. If you look down here at the bottom part of the histogram, and there's almost nothing in the whites. And this, to me, is a good indication that this image is a little bit underexposed. Now, you can adjust these using these controls, but you can also adjust them right here in the histogram. So if I was to grab the histogram and drag to the right, now I'm actually adjusting the exposure. And if I was to highlight this area where the highlights are and drag, I could make that adjustment as well. So you can adjust them either using the sliders below or using this up here. If you're the kind of person who gets fixated on the numbers, as I can be at times, sometimes to avoid that, I'll make my adjustments up here in the histogram, because then I'm trying to make it visually. I'm looking at the histogram, I'm looking at the image to make sure that I have a good exposure. And then the numbers fall where they may, and I don't have to get fixated on what the numbers are. So that's one way to go about it, would be to adjust it here. Another way, and like right now, you can see that the balance is a little bit better. You've got a little bit more exposure in this image. The other way to go about it would be within your masks. So you could leave certain portions of the image darker, and then highlight certain portions of the image, or darken certain, leave them as dark as they are, but then you could maybe take the sky or the subject and make those brighter. That would be another approach. So there's no right answer to getting the right exposure. You could do it in the basic panel. You could do it in masks. You could do it up in the histogram, which is at the basic global level, the same as the basic panel. Either way, keep an eye on your exposure and make sure that you've got kind of a good balance up here. There's no perfect histogram, but if I was to drag down, you could see, and you see that how the histogram looks where everything's bunched on the left. Now you could see that it's clearly underexposed. If I was to grab and drag to the right, and you see everything bunched on the right, you can see things are clearly overexposed. What you really want in your exposure is a histogram that is relatively well balanced, that has a good amount of balance between the darks, the blacks, the highlights, the shadows, the whites, and has a nice kind of a bell curve, if you know what a bell curve is, roughly a bell curve in your image. Now that's not that, again, that's sort of a rule that's meant to be broken, but while you're learning about exposure, it's a good thing to follow, to keep an eye on the histogram. So that's my observations. But aside from those, I think it's a great image, and I like your processing, and I think you've done a great job with it, and you've done a good job with the masks. So thank you very much for sharing, Anshul. I really appreciate it. So there is your images. Very nice. Let's see. All right, excellent. So let's see here. Let me move on to, what do I have next? What do we have coming up next? This is an interesting one. So this is from John. Let me pull up this image, and then I'll let you know what John said while we talk about it. All right, so John says, "Hello, Mr. Shea." That's way too formal for me. I'm submitting an image of a spider to offer you a file type that perhaps you're not familiar with working with. It is an SRF raw image from a 2003 Sony F828. If you've worked with these before, there's no need to bother with this one. I was simply offering it as something different to try out. The image was shot with a 550 nanometer filter. That's an orange filter. Have a nice day. So this is definitely different, and I like different. So I want to try to take a crack at this. So let's see what this looks like and do a little bit of editing here. So a couple things to keep in mind. So, well, first of all, let's talk about profiles. So the Sony F828 camera is pretty old, and you cannot make temperature adjustment profiles for it because it is so old. It is not supported by, maybe it's the raw format that isn't supported, but it's basically not supported by the D&G profile editor. So if you're shooting with that camera, you want to make sure that you're setting a custom white balance and trying to get as close as you can. Now in this image, this isn't about sky or foliage or anything like that, so it's not that big of a deal. But just a heads up that is a camera that does not have profiles. So what could you do with this? Well, I could of course try to white balance on either this or maybe white balance on the spider. But for me, I think for an image like this, I don't know that the color is doing much, and the color is kind of arbitrary. So I might look at making this a monochrome image, and then going down into and in fact, yeah, if you look at the JPEG color swaps, all these colors combinations, they might be interesting for certain subjects, but they're just completely arbitrary. But if we go down to the black and white group, now we could try out some different monochrome profiles and find one that's really interesting. And what I would do is try to look for one that had a lot of contrast. So this 12 is interesting, and I think number 2 was interesting. Because what I would like to do in an image like this is really draw out the contrast of the spider itself and also the web. See how much of the web we can bring out. That's another reason I think getting rid of the color helps to bring out the bring out the web a little bit. So let's try a mask and start off, see what we can do with a mask. Let's do a subject. We've got a subject here, so what the heck? And it's October, so maybe this is a good time for scary things. Lightroom's thinking, and it does a pretty good job of isolating the spider. If you wanted to subtract out the web nearby, you could do a subtract brush and then just remove some of the non-spidery things that were caught there. So we've got a cleaner mask. That's pretty good though. Okay, so we've got a mask of the spider. Let me zoom in a little bit. Zooming in a little bit doesn't get you a lot on a 2003 camera. This is I'm curious. I'm going to go over and look at the metadata now that I'm curious what the metadata looks like. And you know, this is a well, it's you know, 3200 by 2400 image. So, you know, I don't know what that was. Was that like a 8, 10, 12 megapixel, something along those lines? All right, so we've got our spider here. Let me get back into the mask. Make sure I've got him selected. Increase some contrast. And do the same down in the curve space. Create a little bit of definitely texture. No doubt about that. I mean, oh, look at the... I'm gonna zoom in a little bit so that in case it's hard to see on the stream, but you can literally see like hairs on the arms of this thing when I kick up the texture. That is spooky. A little bit of clarity. Got to be careful with that. That'll add too much darkness. I want to make sure I'm actually punching up the highlights a little bit on this, and I might even bring up the exposure just a touch. There we go. So create some strong contrast in this little critter. All right, so the spider's got there's a lot of bite, I'll say, now in the spider. Now the other thing that I would do is try to look at the web and see, can I, this is an older camera with a lower resolution, so maybe a little bit of softness around some of this, but let's see if I can bring up some of that a little bit. So I'm going to take this spider mask. It's not a spider, anything else, just spider mask. Spider mask. Let's see, duplicate and invert. So we're going to duplicate and invert. So now we're just looking at the background. So now what I'm going to try to do is see if I can pull out some of those details with contrast. Really probably could kick up the highlights a lot. Maybe some whites. The other thing that you could do is you could come down to this curve and try to leverage this curve to draw out different parts of the background. So if I create points on either side of this peak here, I could that peak is probably this blob over here. Probably what I'm looking for is over in this area. Let's see here. If I drag my dot over here, you could play around with this with various, oh, nope. That did the opposite of what I was looking for. Let's go back and try over here. You can play around with your dots here and try to find what will get you the amount of contrast. So if on the right side of this peak, I move the dot up higher, which increases the intensity of that tone. And if I do the opposite on the other side, then I can increase the contrast of what's happening in the middle. And I think that really creates some contrast in the web. In fact, if I use this eye tool here, I can hold that down and you can see that's without and that's with. So without and with. So I really like the way that brings out some of these details in the web. And I could probably get some more with texture. You gotta be careful here though. In an image like this, there's going to be a lot of noise because it's an older sensor. So you got to be careful there. Maybe, I like the clarity because the clarity knocks down the background a little bit. So that really brings it out as well. And then you might have to do some some noise reduction as well on an image like this. But I really like that. Maybe this whole thing. Oh, let's see if it's. I'm looking at my histogram and trying to get a gauge for exposure. This is tricky because you've got this little blob here on the right that I don't want to expose too much, but I want to bring up the spider a little bit. So there we go. I think that looks pretty good. So we've got a spider with some bite, and then we've got a little more detail we've pulled out of the web just with the curve and with some clarity, and using that with a mask. So, John, thank you so much for sending in a unusual image with an older camera. They can be challenging to work with, but look at this. You could still get great results and really interesting. You know, the other thing you could do with an image like this is you could maybe do some color grading. So I could come in and maybe add a little, maybe I'll go into the shadows and add a little bit of, you know, color back in. Once I've got my edit done, if I wanted to give it a red, a threatening red, or kind of a holiday orange, you know, you could pick what kind of mood you want to set here, and just adding a nudge of color into the shadows is a great way to enhance a monochrome image and add a little bit of emotion to a monochrome image. You don't need to adjust all of the shadows, midtones, and highlights. You could just pick one, and that could still add some punch to an image. So thank you, John, for sending in your spooky spider picture for October. Very nice shot. Thank you for sharing. All right, here. Let's see. Let me catch up on the chat here. Let's see. All right. Ramen. Oops. Let's see. I've lost my chat overlay. What happened? I'm gonna have to do some debugging here. So let me figure out what's going on. I lost one of my sources here. Maybe it fell asleep on me. I'll get that plugged back in. See if I can bring it to life. There we go. All right. So got that back. I'm trying a little new thing here with our comments here, being able to share some comments on screen. It's working out. I think it's working out pretty well. But except for that little technical snafu with my switcher forgetting about this computer being here. So, Ramen, thank you for joining us from Kansas. And Win is here from Truckee, California. Thank you for joining us. And we have William from Vancouver, the west coast of Canada. So thank you for joining us as well. So glad you're here. All righty. If you have any questions, if anybody has any questions, throw those in the chat. We'll get to those. We've got some time for questions. If you've got a question about infrared photography that you'd like answered, throw that in the chat. We'll get to that. In the meantime, I've got some submissions from Susan to take a look at. So let's let me pull up this image from Susan, and then I'll pull it up, and then I can talk about it. So this one, gotta open this one up in Photoshop. Got a couple images here from Susan to take a look at. A little bit of a follow-up on a previous live stream, and then a whole new image, an amazing new image. So patience here while I load up Photoshop. Grab a drink. All right. 1 second here. Okay. So I'll share this image here, and then I'll let you know what Susan wrote. Let's see. All right. So Susan said, Rob, I wanted to report back after you kindly featured the problem with leaves after processing this image. You could see there was this darkness that was appearing at the top of the image. As soon as you mentioned clarity, it triggered a realization that this, along with the problem you mentioned, the Fuji 14mm lens, was likely the culprit. And I reprocessed the image in CS6, that'd be Photoshop CS6, avoiding using clarity so I did not get the darkening of the tree above. I tried some of your LUTs in Luminar AI, and I've uploaded in a layered PSD. That's what these layers are over here on the right, so we can walk through these. Uploaded the layered PSD with several variations, none of which suffer from the darkening. Excellent. One or two were a little muted, and one fix, the one fix I sometimes use is to overlay a mono conversion on a layer above luminosity mode. I should really use Luminar more, but delighted to find a solution for the problem. Just catching up on the last live stream. It's brilliant to see the work of others, and I can't thank you enough for setting these up. I think there's also an appetite for UVIF. That's the ultraviolet. The IF is when you take the I want to get the word right. I think it's I'm forgetting the exact word because I don't do enough UV. But when you illuminate a subject with UV light and then captured invisible light, it can create for some really stunning images. So she thinks there's an appetite for that. I suspect there as well, and she's dabbled in it, and it's fascinating. Best wishes. So, Sue, let's talk about this image you sent in. In particular, I want to talk about your luminosity hack, because I think that that's really cool. So this was the original problem with the leaves being darkened. This was an updated version out of CS6. This is a version using the LUT from the invert LUT, which is... you had mentioned some of these being a little bit muted. You know, I think some of this might be due to it being overcast and not getting a lot of direct sun. So it could be a subject thing, could be part of it. IR light loves it some sunshine. And so you might get a little more detail and crispness in the image naturally if it's in direct sun. So that could be part of what you're seeing here. This next version is with a channel mixer, and then here's well, I'll show you this one first. This is another variation, the shifting the green channel to red. But the one that I want to talk about is this idea of mixing in a luminosity channel. So based on your topic here in the layer name, it says SilverFX mono luminosity 56%. You can see the opacity here. So this is really cool. And so I'm assuming that what you did here is you took this image into SilverFX Pro, which is a monochrome program. It's going to create a monochrome image. But what's really neat about SilverFX Pro is the kind of things that it can do to create like micro contrast and structure within an image to really bring out detail. Now, that's great if you're doing a monochrome image. You could almost process the whole thing in SilverFX Pro and have an amazing image. I've done it many times. It's fantastic. But what you've done here is taken the detail that you get out of SilverFX Pro, brought it back into Photoshop, and then combined it with a layer that was processed normally in color. So here's what the image looks like with that layer added, and then here is without. So you can see immediately that just adding in, even at about 50% of the luminosity, is bringing in so much detail into this image. And that's definitely a way to counteract the overcast problem in an image like this, is to bring in that detail. But I think that this is it's a great technique for bringing in the power of SilverFX Pro into a color image, so you could still get the benefits in a color image. So thank you for sharing that. That's really cool, and I'm gonna try to remember that more when I run into these kind of circumstances, because you all have probably been there where this happens to me a lot, because I sort of consider myself like a kind of a travel photographer in the sense that sometimes I'm going to a location specifically to shoot it, but more often than not, I'm traveling and I'm only there when I'm there. I'm not going to be back. I may not be back. And if I get there and the light is terrible, then you get what you get. And sometimes that's disappointing. Like I've spent like a whole day in Yosemite and the lighting was overcast. And you know, what can you do with that? What can you make of that? You know, it's like, well, I'm here, I got to make something out of it. And so figuring out the right subjects when you have those conditions, but also techniques that you can use to enhance those subjects when you don't have perfect conditions. That's another great tool to have. So thank you so much, Sue, for sharing that. I really like that technique. Let's see here. I've got another message from Sue. Well, first of all, we've got let's see. Did I lose my I lost my source again. I'm gonna have to work on this comment here. But we've got Bianca's joined us from the Netherlands. Oh, and then Susan, correct me, it's UV induced fluorescence. Induced was the word I was looking for. Induced fluorescence, that's the one. Let's see. She says, glad you like the idea. SilverFX can sometimes overdo things. Certainly, you got to be careful with some of those settings, but it's great for this. Yes, it was you're right. It was an early evening shot where, yeah, you're not going to get as much. I still experiment with shots that are not midday, but they can be more challenging. So definitely something to think about. Okay, let me pull up the next image that Sue has shared. So give me a moment here to get that set up. First of all, I'm trying to figure out my source thing, why my source keeps going away. Let's see here. You guys, you have no idea how many moving pieces there are to these things. Try to keep everything all connected. So many moving parts. All right, let's see here. Okay, get that working. All right, and let's find that next image. Let me pull this image up, and then I will share what Susan had to say. This one is really cool. All right, so let's see here. Switch over to this. So Susan said, thank you for showing my toffee box of IR flowers. If you didn't see that, it was in a previous live stream where Susan had created a chocolate box, I would call it, of mixed chocolates. And instead of in the box being chocolates, there was different edits of various flowers. And that method of sort of compositing all of those together in that format was both extremely creative and a great way to showcase of a whole variety of flowers and different edits in one image. So it was genius. So that's what that was. So Susan said, here's another creation using a traditional quilting design. I need about 28 layers. I need about 28 layers to overlay the floral and leaf images. This was taken with a 550 nanometer orange filter on an 80 millimeter macro lens on a full spectrum Fujifilm X-T1 and color swapped. So take it in, everyone. I just love the creativity that you bring to these images. I haven't done a ton of compositing, and we haven't seen a ton of compositing in our live streams, but the ones that you've brought are really inspiring in the kind of creativity that they bring forth and the way that you could combine multiple images. What I love about this image is that it feels there's like an endless quality to it where my eyes are just, surfing all around the image. There's a symmetry to it. There's these interesting patterns, and sometimes you're drawn to what you think is the foreground versus the alternate boxes versus the background. There's just so much here to focus on that I'm just drawn all over the place. So this is awesome. This is very compelling. I love the creativity that you've brought to this image. And boy, thank you for sharing this with us. I find this really inspiring, and I hope that I can think of potential ideas for compositing that are drawn from an image like this to show us what is possible. And I can imagine the amount of effort, looking at the grid work here. I can only imagine the amount of effort that went into laying this all out. But it has both a complexity to it and a simplicity to it. Maybe that's the benefit of the quilting inspiration. The pattern of it is mesmerizing. So awesome work. Thank you so much for sharing. And let's share some of the comments here. Let's see here. Oh, let me turn my. Oh, I can't turn my thing back on here. Let's see. Let me switch out here. Get my comment machine back on. There we go. Oh, look at that. Appears right over me. So maybe not that. Concepts are intriguing. Absolutely agree. William says it looks like 3-dimensional chess. There is a 3-dimension. I know this is flat. But my brain, there's something about this that definitely has a 3-dimensional look to it. And so Susan says, thanks. I can't wait to see more. These ideas are fantastic. I love it. I love taking infrared photography and finding ways to combine it with other genres, whether it's compositing, or whether it's using a fisheye lens, or other things. And so I'm intrigued. That could be another good showcase that we might do in the future, is how to blend infrared photography with other genres of photography. People have done macro and try to create new things. Yes, I always love me some landscape photography in infrared and some architectural photography. I love that stuff. But seeing what you can do with it as a tool to enhance other genres of photography is awesome. So, Susan, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. All righty here. Let's see. Let's check for questions here. So John says, hi, Rob. What would be a good converted camera and lens to start IR photography? I'm only interested in black and white. Let's see. A good converted camera and lens. So this is super tricky. There's like an entire chapter on the book in how to pick a camera to convert. So let me summarize a few concepts. So first of all, I actually think it's pretty important to I don't think there's a best camera. Let's just get that out of the way first. I don't think there's like one camera that totally destroys all the others and is perfect for this. I think just about certainly any mirrorless camera could be effective. And I'm a big fan of mirrorless cameras, but even if you have a DSLR that you want to convert, you could certainly do that as well. And picking up you don't want to discount being able to use an old camera that you have, or picking up a secondhand or an already converted camera. Those are all great options. I think one of the most important things is to get a camera system that you are familiar with. So if you have already used a particular DSLR or mirrorless camera system from Canon, Nikon, Sony, Fujifilm, Olympus, and so on and so on and so on, any of the above or others, there's nothing wrong with those, and they would probably suit you just fine, and you'll probably be more comfortable with the controls. Infrared photography is hard enough to learn as it is without having to learn the controls of a new camera. And so if you already understand a camera system or a family of cameras from a particular brand, that can make the process easier, because you're not trying to learn a camera in addition to trying to learn infrared. So if you already familiar with a brand, that would be the first thing that I would do. The next thing that I would look at would be, you're going to have to do a comparison of, you know, cost and weight. When I switched from Canon to Fuji, I of course, you know, analyzed my decision to death because that's what I do. But you know, I was comparing what were the cost of the bodies and the lenses, what were the weight of the bodies and lenses. I was trying to move away from the weight because that was a big challenge in the space that I was in, was the weight. And so there's just so many factors to consider. But there's just not one. There's not one perfect system. I would lean towards mirrorless if you can. And the one thing that I would do would be to look at lenses. Look at lenses is going to be key, and probably even before I might even look at lenses before I pulled the trigger on a camera body, and validate that the kind of lenses and the focal range you're looking at are going to support the infrared. They're going to work well in infrared, because you definitely want to be able to have lenses that work well. So yeah, it's a tricky subject because there's so many variables that come into play. I've got a whole video on which camera to convert, and as well as, you know, the chapter in the book. So I've got lots of source material that you could draw from if you want to dive deeper. But I would start with the video, and then as far as like the specifics about black and white, that probably matters less. I mean, obviously you want a good filter, so either you're going to want to convert a camera to the specifics for what you want to convert a camera to, or acquire a converted camera. You're either going to want to do a 720 nanometer filter or conversion, or higher. Now, I've shot great monochrome images on a 590 that I've then converted to monochrome, but I would probably lean towards 720 or a higher conversion. If you get a 720, you can easily convert to monochrome, or you could apply like an 830, 850 filter as well. If you really want to go for it, you could convert a camera directly to that 830, 850 as well. And I've thought about doing that myself, to sort of force me into having a monochrome only camera. But make sure it's a high quality filter is the main thing. You want to either through the conversion company, or use a high quality name brand filter you're using on the outside. So those are the things that I would start with. Think about the brand you want to work towards, and kind of stay in that space. Lean towards mirrorless if you can, but look for good choices from already converted cameras, or used cameras, or extra cameras you already have. You don't need a brand new state-of-the-art camera to shoot great infrared. There's a whole variety of things you could do out there. Let's see. Next question is from Alex. What would be considered natural-looking infrared light? Is it mainly reds, pinks, and then black and white? Ooh, natural. There's a trigger word there. Don't you know that color doesn't exist? So I guess it, like, to me, when I think of natural, I'm thinking in terms of like saturation, is the amount of saturation that's in an image. That's what my brain says when I look at an infrared image and see whether it's natural or not. If it's oversaturated, there are some subjects where oversaturation can work, but if it's too oversaturated, that's where I'm like, that's unnatural to me. So that's one thought. But really, like, the color itself, we may be a little conditioned to think of white leaves and trees as being natural because of infrared film, or a certain color because of a certain color swapping method. But I kind of feel like the sky's the limit these days. We've got so many good color swapping methods, and you could make an argument, I suppose, that a very traditional blue sky and sort of a light yellow orange color in the trees would be sort of the most natural default look. I could see you making an argument like that. and that's going to be very common. That sort of traditional style of infrared is very common. But I don't know that there's a, I don't know. It's subjective. It's entirely subjective. You know, so many different opinions. And I think a lot of them are valid. Most of them are valid. They're all valid opinions. Let's see. Kathleen, good morning from Idaho. Thanks for joining us. All righty. Let's see what's next here. Let me pull up my next image here. Oh, it's a question. This is a question. This is a good one. Let's see here. This is from Dale. Dale says, let me pull this over here so I can read it better. Dale says, hi, Rob, love your videos and wonderful book. Thank you for your time and expertise in the IR community. I have a question, which I'm hoping you can answer. I won't be on the live stream while you're doing it as I'm photographing a charity event. Nice. However, I will be watching later. My question, I'm in the process of moving from a Mac computer to a Windows machine. I recently accessed files from my LR catalog, transferred from the Mac to my Windows machine. They all came through with their edits, except for the IR images, which came over as red and unprocessed images. Do you know how I can get the images to come over with the edits? I use your profiles in my processing. Thank you. All right, absolutely. Let's talk about what you can do to deal with moving from computers. And this could be, we'll cover could be moving between computers or moving to a new computer, for example. So let's pull up. There's an article I'm gonna point you to, and I'll put a link to this article in the comments as well. So let's talk about this article. Let me pull it up here. This is Where Are My Profiles? Which I think really covers a lot of bases and is really helpful. So let's talk about a little bit about where the profiles live and what you need to know when you're moving from one computer to another, regardless of which operating system, same operating system, or which direction you're going. Kind of the same applies to all of this. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is learn about the Camera Raw folder. So let's jump down to that. The Camera Raw folder is where Adobe is storing all of profiles, traditional DCP profiles, new enhanced XMP profiles. They're all being stored in the Camera Raw folder. So that's your starting point. Now the challenge here is that the location is a little bit different between the two operating systems. So on the Mac, it's stored in the library, application support, Adobe Camera Raw, which is actually a shortcut to this longer one. But that's okay. You could just plug this in and that'll get you there. So that's how you get to the Camera Raw folder on the Mac. And then Windows is a little bit different because you're going to have your drive, could be your C drive, could be another drive, users, your username, where there's this variable, this user profile variable allows you to jump right to your username, app data, roaming, Adobe Camera Raw. So both of these folders allow you to get to the Camera Raw folder, which is the starting point. This is where you want to start if you're thinking about moving between machines. So once you get into that folder, now what are you going to do? So now we have to look at there's two key directories within Camera Raw where things can live. There is Camera Profiles and Settings. And Camera Profiles, this is the folder where you're going to have your DCP profiles. So this is like if you downloaded the infrared profile pack, or if you created your own DCP files with the DNG profile editor, they're going to live in the Camera Profiles folder. So that's a folder you're going to want to grab and get whatever's in that folder. There may be very little in it, or it may be just the DCP files. This would be like the infrared temp -50, infrared temp -100. They would be living in this folder. So grab those files. The other folder to think about is the settings folder. And the settings folder has a variety of things. It has the enhanced profiles, but it also can have presets. They're both stored in this XMP format. And so they're going to live in this folder. So if you are using my infrared Lightroom color swap profiles, they're going to live in this folder, whether the ones I provided or whether you've created your own, they're going to live in this folder. So you're going to want to grab what's in this folder. So what I'm guessing is happening to you, Dale, is that you didn't grab maybe, it could be that you didn't grab both of these, or it could be that you didn't grab the DCP files from the camera profiles folder, because these are the core ones. These are the ones that will allow you to do the color temperature shift. And without these, nothing will work, because all of the color swap profiles are based on DCP files. And so without these as a base file, these will fail as well. And then you'll get a poor rendering. And sometimes in Lightroom or in Camera Raw, it will say something like, it'll say missing profile. Like I've seen that occasionally when, like, for example, if somebody sends me an image that they've edited and I open it up in Lightroom and maybe they used up their own profile that they created, it'll say missing profile. Or like I have some, when I first got started in infrared, I created a bunch of profiles before I kind of standardized on the system that I have now that I've shared with you all. I had some older profiles that I don't know what I was like. I don't know what I was thinking. Like, I don't know how I got there. I don't even know how they were built. I look at them. I looked at the results. I'm like, I couldn't even tell you why this looks so terrible. and so some of those, I hit a point where I'm like, you know what? I need to move these out. So I kind of move them out of these folders so I didn't have to see them anymore. And then sometimes I'll run into an old image that I want to look at that was shot and edited with one of those old profiles and say missing profile. I'm like, okay, then I just got to apply one of my new profiles and tweak the edit a bit. But really, so I've had to do this a few times, moving between machines, and I've got a Windows machine where I do the bulk of my editing, but I also have a MacBook Air where I do some editing occasionally, and I have to make sure that, you know, I have all these profiles on both machines to make sure they work properly. So that's the key, is to make sure that you're grabbing the DCP files out of the camera profiles folder, and that you're grabbing the XMP files out of the settings folder, and that you're moving them to the new machine, and then you're moving it to the right folder depending on wherever your Camera Raw folder is, whether it's the Mac directory or the Windows directory. It doesn't matter. They're just a different directory, but it's the same thing. So that's it. That's all it takes. And once you've done that, then close and restart Lightroom or Photoshop, and then it should see all the files and you should be fine. So hopefully that'll get your problem solved, Dale, and you can get back to editing. I know some of this stuff, these are challenging issues because they, you know, when they work, they just work. And when they don't, you don't get a lot of, it's not obvious why they don't work. And so trying to dig into that is a bit of a challenge. All righty, let's see here. So I think I've figured out my cabling problem. I have an HDMI adapter that might go in the trash after this. And I've switched over to an Apple one. So we'll see if things are going better there. So I don't lose my comments. So let's see where we are in comments. Let's see. John says, thanks, Rob. I use an Olympus Micro Four Thirds, so it'll be mirrorless. So I'll watch your video on this. Yes. So those are solid. All mirrorless cameras are solid. The reason that I really like mirrorless cameras for there's two reasons that I like mirrorless cameras for infrared. Number one is the easy one. You don't have the focusing problems that you do with DSLRs. You don't have the optical viewfinder with a different focusing system. You only have one focusing system. There might be flavors of it, but it's all focusing off the sensor, so you don't have to worry about that. So it just removes that. But the reason I really like mirrorless cameras is the additional focusing features. So particularly peak focusing. I love peak focusing. I love when I shoot with manual lenses, which I do a lot. I love being able to go in and set peak focusing and setting it to blue so it stands in contrast to the red of the image normally, and it makes focusing so much easier. I could punch in, zoom in, see those peaks, rack the focus, find what I like, or I could just keep a wide shot and be able to see the depth of field that I'm getting from. That's the other cool thing about peak focus is you can see because it's highlighting parts of the image, as you rack your focus, you can see like sort of the depth of field moving forward and backward. So you're getting an impression of how much depth of field you're getting. You don't even get that in autofocus, right? Like this is information that you're getting in when you manually focus with peak focusing that you're not getting with autofocus. And that's great for landscape photography when you're trying to figure out that depth of field. And if I'm shooting, like I was just shooting this last weekend with this, scenic, hopefully beautiful shot where I had these rocks in the foreground that are like, 6 feet away, and then these beautiful coastline and sky, which are at infinity. And how do I know what's in focus? And being able to use peak focus and be able to see, what's the front edge of that plane versus the background, and make sure that I've got that good balance, especially in infrared where I have to use a lower f-stop and I get less depth of field. The peak focusing really helps me to visualize that. So yes, there's some DSLRs that have peak focusing, some of the newer ones, but it's just one of those features that tends to be pretty universal in mirrorless cameras, and that's so all of the stuff that relates to focusing is great. Those are the features that I really like. Okay, so let's see. Moving on here. So I have an image from Phil. So let's take a look at this image from Phil. Let me pull this up here. Get this going in Lightroom, and then I'll read what Phil. I'm gonna show you. Let's start with Phil's edit, and I'll pull up Phil's edit so you can take a look at it while I'm reading what he wrote. So we'll take a look at this. All right. So here's Phil says. Let's see. Hi Rob, 2 images from the same location. San Simeon Point in California, one at 830 nanometers and one at 720, using a Canon 5D Mark IV full spectrum conversion. What do you think? Just started using a monitor, the Atomos Shinobi 5-inch screen for focusing. Huge difference over live view on the camera. Includes its own 2x and 4x magnification, plus histograms, much easier to see and focus with. Thanks for the show. That sounds pretty cool. I'd like to try that. It depends. So when my first infrared camera was a DSLR, and it had, I don't remember if the 5D Mark IV has a articulating screen or not, but my first DSLR did not have an articulating screen. It had a fixed screen on the back of the camera. It was an inexpensive Canon SL1. So a very nice camera, great, pretty solid picture quality, crop sensor, but it had that fixed screen on the back, which, I think they fixed that in the SL2 and SL3 models later. But I found that very frustrating when I was first shooting, because it was so hard to see in daylight. And I ended up getting one of these, I'd try to use the viewfinder and get a cup for the viewfinder. And I eventually got one of these like things that you put over top the live view to kind of make it like a hood. So you could just look at the live view, but with a thing you'd put up to your eye. And I actually used that for a while on that, just so I could see the screen. But this using an external monitor sounds pretty cool. Now, I haven't had as much of a need with my recent cameras, probably because I have the articulating backs, and maybe they're brighter, maybe the screens are brighter, so I can easily choose between the view on the back or the optical viewfinder. But definitely for certain circumstances, if the light is challenging, and I still, even with the gear I'm using today, I still run into situations where it is so bright out that I'm struggling to see what I'm doing and composing. And that the biggest challenge for me for that is like edge management, to make sure that, like, okay, I've got this composition and I think is good, but if I'm struggling to see my screen, how do I know that I don't have too much clutter on the edges, or I'm doing I've got the perfect composition, or something's cropping, some thing is jutting into the screen. So it still could be challenging, due to the brightness. And so I'm fascinating to hear your story of using a 5-inch screen. That probably means you're using a tripod. Maybe it doesn't have to mean that. But with all the extra gear. So interesting setup. Okay, let's talk about the image here. So I really like that what you've done here is you have this image, And let me talk about the image first. Like I love these clouds. These clouds are awesome. And what's cool about it is it feels like almost got a little bit of like a Nike swoop here going on, but really they're following the shape of the coastline in a sense, like a mirrored up into the sky shape of the coastline. So you've got this arc that's coming in. If we go from here, arc is coming in, and then you've got the same arc in the clouds. Oh, that repeating pattern. I love it. That's one of the cool things about certain locations is that, and also about infrared, is that if you get these unique cloud formations, they're not going to be there. The next person that comes along and takes a photo is not going to get the same thing you are. You're there, and you've captured this, and that's just a cool feeling to me, to be able to capture what's happening in the clouds that not everybody's going to get. You got it, and it looks awesome. So I love the clouds in this. I love the dark water, the rocks. So fantastic. Let's talk about the two images that you captured. You captured this with a 720 and an 830. What does that mean? What could you do with it? And I want to tell you the thought process that I have in going through this, because that maybe influenced the thought process you went through. You ended up with a monochrome image, and I really like your choice there. So this would be the 720 image. And let's just do a quick edit on this so we can see what the thought process is here. So I'm going to pull up a profile, and we'll white balance maybe on this rock. Yep, that looks pretty good. Okay, so now you've got your typical color here. And if I did a color swap, let's do a quick color swap so I can get a feel for what I'm looking at. Okay, so I picked one of the color swaps, and here we go. You got a pretty standard image. Now, this is the thing. When I look at this image, what am I looking at? What are my eyes drawn to? So, yeah, you've got some, if I even do a quick auto here to pop it up a bit. So, okay, I've got this lovely color, this lovely blue. I love me a lovely blue in the water. You've got some of these rocks in the foreground. You've got these trees. They're nice, but they're not the key subject here. And you've got a lovely blue in the sky. But it's almost like, to me, the clouds almost get a little lost in this. They kind of fall out as not being the dominant piece of this. To me, my eye tends to be drawn to the water and maybe the tree line, but not the sky. And so if that's what you're looking for in an image, then that could work. If I go to the raw of the 830, let's do a quick edit on this one. Did I do an edit on this? Maybe I did an edit on this. So, picking up a black and white, one of these profiles, darken the sky up a bit, get this deep dark water, which I really like. But now you've got the opportunity, if I do a mask here and do a quick sky, then I've got this opportunity to really create some punch in these clouds. Lightroom is thinking. Add some dehaze, drama this thing up a bit. Okay, so, maybe even go up here and punch up some highlights. So I can play around, I can really draw out these clouds, and I can really get this focus in the clouds. And to me, if I have a choice between, and again, I love this black sky. It's fantastic. So if I have a choice between a color and a monochrome image, a lot of times the decision that I'm using to make is what do I want people to look at? What is the real subject? And you can literally see here, at least for me, my eyes are drawn to something different. I'm drawn to the clouds in this. The clouds really stand out as being the strong part of this. And yeah, the water's great, dark water and the rocks and the trees. It's all good supporting stuff, but to me, it's supporting the clouds. Whereas if I go to the, let me do a side by side here. There we go. So it might be different for everybody, because we all have our different little perceptual processing engines in here that tell us what color is and all that other kind of stuff. But for me, when I look at these images, when I look at the 830 on the left, that's just even a light edit. Those clouds are the subject. They're the real story here. And when I look at the image on the right and the color one, it's like, you know, maybe the water, maybe that's it. Just doesn't have that. Maybe the birds even, you can start to see the birds. So it's very, I guess, a little bit of a time delay. You don't have the birds in the other image, but you know, to me, I guess I'm emphasizing that I think Phil made a great choice here, because while I think this is an interesting image, I think it's a more powerful image in monochrome. It's a more powerful image in the deep infrared, and I really like that choice. Let's go back and look at his edit, which is great. Pull this up and take a look at it. So this is really solid. So my only criticism, observation, if you will, Phil, if you'll allow me an observation, is, and there's a lot of staircasing going on here in the in this version, and I just wonder what your export settings were. So if you have, you know, broad swaths of color like this, especially in a monochrome image, the JPEG color palette isn't as broad. And so if I did some quick tests, and if I did like a 5 or a 6 or 50 or 60, depending on your JPEG scale, you could produce this kind of stair stepping and get this kind of effect going on in the sky. Whereas if you kick it up to like an 8 or an 80% of a JPEG setting, you could get rid of that, and it's much smoother. Now it's going to be a bigger image file, but who cares? So you're gonna get rid of some of that. So just something to be aware of. But I love this image. I love the clouds, and I think that the choice that you've made here of doing this as a monochrome image is the right choice. So thank you for sharing with us. I really appreciate it. All right. So any other questions? If you have any questions, now's the time. I've gotten through all of my prepared material, so I'll answer a few questions here in the chat before we wrap up. Your last opportunity. Before we wrap up, I'll do a quick, another quick plug for the book. Today's the last day for the end of summer sale for the book. If you want to buy the print edition of the book, you can use the code SUMMER20, SUMMER20, to get 20% off the book. If you want to get free shipping, you can use the code FREESHIP, and that's off the print and ebook edition. A particularly good value for international customers who the shipping costs are high, and that saves you like a ton of money there. So if you want to do that, today's the last day at infraredbook.com, and this is the print edition Summer 20 or the print ebook edition combo, free ship. Those are the two codes that you want to get. And if you want to get updates on future sales or other future things that are happening, go to my website and sign up for the newsletter, and then you'll be notified if there's whatever happens in the future sales or anything going on. All right, so let's dive in here and talk about some questions, see what we've got here. Let's see here. We've got one from B. From B, does wavelength affect depth of field? This is an excellent question. This is a question that I want to do some tests on and validate this. I think this might be one of my winter projects this year, is to do some actual depth of field tests with some infrared filters and see if I can compare those to the results from visible light. Here's what I do know. So I know that infrared light, well, really all light, whether it's visible light or infrared, focuses at a different plane depending on where depending on the wavelength, and that the optical design of lenses is used to try to draw those in together to be the same plane, so that our images are in focus. You still see the where that doesn't work out well in the edges of your images where you have chromatic aberration. So that's a challenge. We know that we have more diffraction at a lower f-stops in infrared. the piece that I don't know is, does the depth of field change? So if I'm shooting at 5.6 in infrared and I have a certain amount of depth of field, and if I shoot it in visible light at 5.6, will I have the same depth of field, or is it different between visible light and infrared? So I've heard people say that you have more depth of field in infrared, but I haven't seen any evidence of that. I want to see the evidence. So I may have to create my own evidence and do some shooting to see what I can find there. So it's on my list. It could be another one of my big technical breakdowns where I do a bunch of shooting and try to find, get some answers here, try maybe some different lenses, try some different cameras, try some different filters, and see if I can find any differences between them, like I did when I did all the diffraction tests. So I do not know the answer to this yet. How much it affects depth of field, but I'm hoping to find out so that I can share that with everyone. So, but thank you for asking. It's been the top of my mind for a while now. Again, probably a winter project. All right. Well, that wraps it up for today. Thank you so much for joining this live stream. I'm thinking about, as I mentioned earlier, doing some topic-based showcases in the future. So we pick a topic and then have everybody send in images that we can all look at based on that topic. So it could be a subject, could be a technique, could be a filter. And I will, if you have any suggestions, shoot them my way. And I will, once I've figured out the specifics of that, I'll put that on the next newsletter so people can collect their images and send them in. But in the meantime, thanks so much for joining. Appreciate you stopping by, and happy shooting. Take care.